But he didn't say he wouldn't use economic force, which of course he's already threatened.
We do have Sarah Baxter, don't we? Director of the Marie Colvin Center for International Reporting, listening alongside us. Sarah, we've had so many messages from listeners this afternoon, all of them entertaining, none of them broadcastable, unfortunately. But what did you think of that?
Okay, so I listened with interest to your bingo card because I had a lot of the same thoughts. Just quickly on the economic miracle that is America. Why is it that Americans themselves aren't feeling it? 61% of people in a CBS poll say it's going in the wrong direction. His approval ratings are way down. But be that as it may, Trump had a powerful message there to deliver about his own success. And then, of course, he said something very interesting and sit-upable about Greenland, i.e. he was not going to use force, not excessive strength and force anyway. So, of course, that's something to be applauded. There was a huge sort of few in the room, I kind of thought. And yet, he was also saying, nice little country, Greenland, or was it Iceland? This piece of ice that he kept calling Iceland, that you've got there. And, basically he was saying, I'm going to get it by hook or by crook anyway. And by the end of his ramblings, I'm very pro-American, but I was beginning to get really offended by his insulting tone to everybody.
Yes.
To all Europeans, to Canadians, to the Swiss, to Emmanuel Macron, to all NATO members, to Mark Rutte, that he called out, Mark in his room like he was some sort of pet, and it just set my teeth on edge.
Okay, he is vulgar at times, isn't he? He's just vulgar.
Yeah, he's vulgar. He says what he likes. He adopted the tone of a mafia boss, really, saying, we give you everything, you give me nothing. America's now a protection racket. You pay to play. Obviously, I'm going in strong there, but I actually thought that it started off quite well, even though it was all his usual bombast, exaggerations, half-truths and untruths. It was nonetheless, Trump on quite good form. And by the end of it, he was rambling, insulting and exhausted, I think.
Okay, is there any way back for this administration on Greenland? Because he has said in that speech that he wants immediate negotiations and quotes, the US will remember if it doesn't get Greenland. So they can't back down, can they?
Well, that's what I mean by you've got to pay to play. He acts like America's the only country that's ever done anything for anybody else, that it only ever does anything out of its big-heartedness or weakness or stupidity. Honestly, it's such a sort of inversion of the truth. And I am worried that he is now psychologically committed to Greenland, and this is, acquiring it. And this is a man who told the New York Times in a New Year interview that the only thing he feels constrained by is his own morality. So make of that what you will.
Yes, I guess it depends how you interpret his own idea of his own morality. We perhaps should revisit some of the highlights from the speech in case people have just tuned in. This is Times Radio, and listeners who've been with us since about 1:45 this afternoon have heard Donald Trump's address to the World Economic Forum in Davos. It's just finished, and during the course of the speech he said he could use force to take Greenland, but he's not going to. Here's a little clip.
Europe, I'm helping NATO, and I've until the last few days when I told them about Iceland, they loved me. They called me daddy, right, last time. A very smart man said, he's our daddy. He's running it. I was like running it. I went from running it to being a terrible human being. But now what I'm asking for is a piece of ice, cold and poorly located, that can play a vital role in world peace and world protection.
Right. Is he right in saying that actually this idea of America acquiring Greenland isn't new? Indeed, it's been around for quite some time.
I remember when I was deputy editor of the Sunday Times dispatching our Washington correspondent to Greenland because Trump threatened to acquire it in his first presidency. So it's long been on his to-do list. What's more, he is correct that during World War II, Denmark, which fell to the Nazis, was not able to, there was a fear that Greenland would itself become in part of the sort of Nazis, quest for world domination and a path in the Arctic for the Nazis, and therefore America moved in big time. But the whole point of NATO is that allies work together. And I guess his most insulting bit was where he said, I don't think you'll be there for us, so why will we be there for you? And
Yeah.
and that's such a terrible interpretation of history. Where I was the US correspondent when 9/11 happened, and Britain and others were in Europe, including Denmark, were the first to offer help.
Yes.
So it's just, he doesn't care about that. He doesn't think it matters. But yes, I mean, funnily enough, America does have a case for saying Greenland matters to us and we'd like to run it. So why doesn't he do a sensible deal on it? Why does it have to be owned with the Trump name above it, so to speak? Call it Trumpland or something. He only believes something truly exists when, like the Trump Kennedy Center, or now his Trump name above the Nobel Peace Prize offered to the Venezuelan opposition leader. He only accepts it really matters if he owns it.
Can we just go to the fact that Donald Trump did say he was going to leave Greenland out of the speech altogether, but then he realised he had to include some reference at least to Greenland. Do you think his team actually seriously intended him not to reference Greenland at all today?
No. But there were two audiences for the speech. One, the domestic one, and I think his aides would have been worried hearing this story of economic miracle that is so at odds with the American people's experience. And you'll see that at the end of his speech, it did become very long and rambling towards the end. This was at the most low energy point of his speech. He started to talk about the carrots that he would be offering the American people in terms of, sort of trying to make them a nation of homeowners again, bring interest rates down, cheaper credit cards, and that kind of thing, because the American people are very unhappy at the moment with Donald Trump. And they think that he's been spending too much time, wanging on about the Nobel Prize and trying to acquire territory. 80% of the American people don't want Greenland, certainly don't want him to invade Greenland. So instead of concentrating on them, and they thought that America first was concentrating on them and not about me first, concentrating on Donald Trump and his legacy. So I think that's why Greenland was sort of stuck in the middle of what was otherwise a speech very much addressed to a domestic audience as well as a European one and a NATO one, where basically you're saying you're nothing without America. America is the daddy, as Mark Rutte, the leader of NATO, yes, called him.
Yeah, in a grim moment, he might come to regret. We all know that if a woman, any female politician, had made a speech like the one we've just heard, about 10 minutes in, a couple of fellas in white coats would have entered the arena and would have taken her off to be treated for a nervous condition. And yet we accept this. We accept the fact that this man kept getting the name of the country he wants to buy wrong. Let's have a listen.
We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force, where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland.
That's actually not the clip we wanted, but I know Ryan's been super busy this afternoon. Let's hear the one we did want right then. Here it is.
Europe, I'm helping NATO, and I've until the last few days when I told them about Iceland, they loved me. They called me daddy, right? Last time. A very smart man said, he's our daddy. He's running it. I was like running it. I went from running it to being a terrible human being. But now what I'm asking for is a piece of ice, cold and poorly located, that can play a vital role in world peace and world protection.
Yes, I mean, it's not desperately reassuring. I don't think anybody from Iceland called him daddy, but I could be wrong. Sarah, help us out. What does that mean?
All right. So Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, called him daddy. That was a while back. This business of how he went from popular to unpopular, well, he was not perhaps popular, but he was it was understood that, of course, that America has a very, very consequential leading voice in NATO. But of course, it went to unpopular as soon as he started to suggest that America was going to take over a slice of NATO territory, an independent, part of another country's territory. So, of course, he suddenly dropped in popularity there. So why he sort of thinks it's so ridiculous that he should have is beyond me. And I guess really this business of, how well is he? I mean, the mere fact, for example, that Air Force One had some electrical failures and had to turn around when it first took off for Europe would have been seen as catastrophic on Biden and somehow, pinned at his feet as an example of incompetence and senility. But Trump got away with that. He gets away with berating everybody. And and by the end of the speech, he was rambling and hoarse. And so people started to ask, is this man truly well? He is going to turn 80 this year. So he's the oldest US president in history, but he does seem to have a sort of, energy level that comes out of this self-inflated vision of himself. And that's the one thing that keeps him unstoppable. And of course, on the subject of Greenland, he said he wouldn't use force. And I think let's take the win on that. That is huge news. But he didn't say he wouldn't use economic force, which, of course, he's already threatened.
Yeah, OK. And none of which is desperately reassuring to the other members of NATO. Right. Thank you very much, Sarah. There's so much more we could talk about. But we've got lots of other good guests to squeeze in. That was Sarah Baxter. Thank you.